Loving thy neighbour is easier said than done.
If he was a slug, I would put salt round him so he explodes.
They nearly got me arrested.
That's the type of noise we have to put up with.
When the garden fence marks enemy lines.
Have you got your recorder on?
It's right up there.
Really?
Your home life can turn into a living hell.
Give me my dog!
What have you?
What the hell's the matter with you?
Coming up, a family dog is killed by next door.
Watch out, my heart's just been pulled away.
A fight over land gets nasty.
We were bullied into protecting what was ours.
I am not moving. This is my land. This is my property.
And an entire block is terrorised by one woman.
She'd had like a 20-year history of terrorising the building.
Whitehaven, a remote town on the coast of Cumbria, would appear to be the perfect place to settle and live a quiet and peaceful life. But things don't always turn out as planned.
The whole situation, total nightmare.
Past 5 years, it's been hell. I've sat and I've cried and I've cried.
Carol and Trevor Gilmore bought a rundown barn in the area that was to be their little slice of heaven.
Trevor actually fell in love with it right away. He didn't even have to go into the property itself.
You could tell the potential of the building and the panoramics. That's what really sold me on it.
But the beautiful views weren't the only thing that came with the barn. Lynn Brophy had lived next door for 18 years, and the previous owners had had long-running disputes with her in the past.
We were told not to get into any confrontation with her from the estate agents from the word go, and we didn't.
In 2009, Trevor and Carol got the keys to the barn, and as a building tradesman, Trevor wanted to be hands-on in the renovation.
Plan was to do the property up over the next couple of years as and when we could afford it, and then when it got to near completion, sell our own property and spend the equity out of that for the internal finishes.
With a mammoth task on their hands, the Gilmores started work immediately.
This building here, it was unsafe and it was derelict, so we got security fencing which ran right along to the fence.
It was up for sale. It had been ransacked, so we thought, because it was a bit semi-rural and we weren't on site all the time, we had to put CCTV up to protect the place.
The cameras covered their garden and outbuildings 24/7. But what they caught on camera were their neighbours.
Mrs. Brophy and her family dismantled part of the Harris fencing, went into the area with a strimmer and a lawnmower. And this little bit of grass here, the seamless concrete, they used to strim it. We didn't have a clue why they were engaging in such bizarre behaviour.
We laughed at first and thought she's doing a job for us.
Yeah,
she's keeping the weeds down.
But Trevor and Carol would soon find out that providing a free gardening service was the last thing on her mind.
We were working here. Mrs. Brophy came from her house, said, "Can I have a word?" So we stopped work and started talking to her.
I did, you didn't.
Well, Trevor started talking to her, I just observed.
Trevor Gilmore was fine. He introduced himself as Trevor and he was quite nice. But Carol, she stayed standoffish. She didn't speak, she didn't say hello, she didn't say anything. And I thought, uh-oh, alarm bells started ringing, to be honest.
And it was at that point that Trevor asked her to remove her belongings from a building that was on our land.
She said no, the garage was actually owned by her. Well, according to our deeds, it was in my land.
And her answer was, Well, it's in my deeds as well.
Land agency drew the deeds up wrong.
I says, I believe they're mine. I was told that they were mine. I says, and that's it at the end of the day.
And I thought, we'll see, I'll sort you out.
No, you didn't.
So on a Saturday morning, 8:30, I came up with 2 colleagues who works for us, my wife and my stepson, and we cleared the garage out.
I couldn't believe what I was seeing, to be honest. I couldn't. Shouted through the window, leave that stuff alone, it's mine, that building does not belong to you, get off it. They just laughed. That's all they did, was just stood there laughing.
Trevor's deeds showed that Mrs. Brophy owned less than a metre of the garage.
Then I got my still saw out, split it on the boundary, and then knocked it down with a sledgehammer. We left her with a bush shelter.
How could I stop them? How? I'd like to know how. I couldn't go up and wrestle them to the ground or anything like that.
But a few months later, Lynn Brophy dealt them another blow.
We got a letter in the post, and she was claiming part of the land.
And that was the start of our nightmare.
Lynn was putting in a claim through the courts for possession of the Gilmore's entire front garden, on the grounds that she had tended to it for the last 18 years.
Started tending that land when I moved there in 1997, in summer, and I've got photographic evidence to prove that as well.
We laughed at first because we couldn't believe it, and then when we realised how serious it was, we just couldn't believe that somebody could do that. We were so angry.
We were bullied into protecting what was ours.
The gauntlet had been thrown, and the Gilmores had no choice but to engage a solicitor and build their case for court.
It was just paperwork, research. It was a full-time job for me. I didn't sleep. I could go for days without sleeping. It took over our lives. It took over everything. It was a 24/7
nightmare.
Coming up, a dog-loving family's worst nightmares come true.
They've both been shot.
If a dog was going to kill 120 birds, there's going to be some sort of blood around the front.
And a woman terrorises a whole block of flats.
A lot of her sort of staring into our windows.
Stupid car. It.
Neighbourly disputes can be a nightmare, and for some people, police intervention is the only option for peace of mind.
She would watch from her windows. She will bang on their doors at 2 in the morning, and she will get closer and closer and menace them.
Go on, you're all right. What are you going to do, eh?
3 years ago, Julie Reid moved into a property in a small block of 10 flats in Chesham.
My boyfriend already lived there for 6 months when I moved in. I was living in Ireland at the time. It was just to stop the long distance. It wasn't really working for us. I was aware that one of the neighbours was a little bit eccentric, as the landlord put it.
The block of flats where they were renting had a communal car park, and it was here that Julie first met her new neighbour, Judith Robinson, just 1 week after moving in.
I was going to my car, and as I was about to get in, Judith came from round behind me. It was the first time I'd officially met her.
She was very rude. She didn't introduce herself. She proceeded to tell me that I wasn't allowed to park where I was because I didn't live there. I tried to explain to her that I'd just moved in.
Julie decided it was best to avoid her neighbour, but that wouldn't be easy.
We were in bed, it was about 1 a.m, and we were woken up by the sound of the doorbell ringing, and then someone holding their finger down on the doorbell, so it was sort of continuous. We were a bit worried as to why someone thought maybe it was some sort of emergency. So I think Paul was a bit surprised when he got to the door and it was just Judith standing there.
Our neighbour Judith had a high-powered torch which she shone in his face and babbled incoherently about our kitchen worktop. My boyfriend followed her round the building because he didn't understand what she was saying, and it seems that while we'd been out, a kitchen worktop had been delivered and left face down in my car parking space, and because there weren't any lights, I hadn't seen it and I parked on it without noticing. She was insisting that I should get out of my bed and move the car because I was damaging her kitchen worktop.
Julie was starting to get the idea that her neighbour was a little more than just eccentric, and used her mobile phone to start documenting some of Judith's behaviour.
If you went to the bathroom in the middle of the night and Judith was in the garden, it could be as late as sort of 2 or 3 in the morning. She would sort of make howling noises. Sometimes the howling would be like screeching or saying words.
You stupid car.
Or other times it could be like wolf howling or owl noises. One time I was in the bathroom, probably about 2 or 3 a.m. She started yelling, "Kill it." I'm assuming to her cat, but it was really creepy.
But it wasn't just strange noises that Julie found disturbing when her neighbour Judith was in the garden.
There was a lot of her sort of staring into our windows. She gave us the finger quite a lot if we were in the kitchen. She'd get her torch out late at night, sort of 10, 11, and start shining it in our windows.
Julie and Paul just wanted a quiet life and tried to avoid running into their neighbour. But the car park was on shared ground.
I came down to my car one morning and found that my wiper blade had been rotated down, so it was pointing in the wrong direction.
And that wasn't all.
Happening quite regularly that when I came down to my car, the wing mirrors would have been moved, pointing completely the wrong direction that you wouldn't be able to drive with. I mean, I had pretty strong suspicions that it was more than likely Judith, because she'd been out in the garden making a lot of noise the night before. We'd been in the flat about a year, and Judith's behaviour got to the sort of annoyed us enough that we decided to phone the police. And there's a dedicated police officer at Cheshire Police that deals with her, which should have told us something. It was kind of a bit of an eye-opener because we just thought that she was a bit of a sad old lady at that point, and actually it turned out she'd had like a 20-year history of terrorising the building.
In the last 12 years, the amount of harassment cases reported to the police has more than doubled, and PC Phil Thompson had been aware of the problems with Judith since joining the branch 3 years previously. But the one thing he was lacking was hard evidence.
Every previous victim that was being harassed by Judith had dropped out. The first time I met Julie, I had to lay it out to them. Are you going to give statements? Are you going to record what you're being exposed to? Are you willing to have CCTV? Because it's quite an involved process to be able to prove what they were telling me was going on.
Desperate to end their broken nights and get some peace, Julie and Paul agreed to do what was needed to catch Judith in the act.
We'd hoped that the CCTV camera would be a deterrent, but actually she just sort of escalated.
In Cumbria, Trevor and Carol Gilmore had bought land and a tumble-down barn with the hope of building their dream home. But it had become a bitter fight when Lynn Brophy, their only neighbour for miles, claimed she actually owned most of their property.
The only reason that we can think of to explain Mrs. Brophy's behaviour is that she's bitter that we bought the property when her family were trying to buy it.
My son and daughter-in-law had made offers on the property, and they were declined, and then they made another offer and they were declined, and they ended up making an offer of £81,000, and it was knocked back for Mr. and Mrs. Gilmore's £60,000 offer.
The previous owners had chosen not to sell to Lynn Brophy, selling instead to the Gilmores. But Lynn still wanted it, and now claimed the Gilmores' entire front garden was in fact hers. The Gilmores were now being forced to prove they owned the land, despite their deeds being clear.
The legal bills kept going up and up and up.
And Trevor's day job was suffering.
I was letting people down that I'd worked for years, and At one stage they said take time out to get yourself sorted and then come back to us.
And they were still trying to continue work on the barn whenever they had a free moment.
Mr Gilmore knows they're not supposed to work at weekends. They can work on a Saturday till 1 o'clock and not Sundays. They worked with a digger, and I thought, I don't believe this. It's just like a builder's yard. And your house vibrates, you can feel the digger breaking the concrete.
Come on, girls.
For Lynn, living next door to the Gilmores' new home was becoming hard to bear.
I even had to have noise monitors in my house because Mrs Gilmore had a cockerel on the front.
We had about 120 visits in a 12-month period. As I say, numerous visits off the council. Nothing was ever proved.
It got to the stage where we wanted to do something, we had to have a right good look at it and think, I wonder what problems this is going to arise. She done everything in her power to hold us up from actually renovating our property.
The court date arrived, and during the case, the previous owners of the barn rubbished Lynn's claims that she had tended the land.
The judge ruled everything in our favour. There was no land to be split, and in the verdict he said quite how Mrs Brophy thought she would be able successfully to deceive the respondents and the adjudicator and her own lawyers, no doubt, with this crude piece of manipulation, I have no idea. Which, when we read it, made us feel so much better, because we realised that other people could see through our lies as well.
When I lost the case, I was depressed. It wasn't nice being made a liar. I can tell you now, it wasn't.
Lynn was also ordered to pay the Gilmores an interim payment for their costs during the case, a total of £10,000.
Our dream was back on track. I think we went out for a meal that night and enjoyed ourselves. Didn't last long at all.
The Gilmores had beaten Lynn Brophy in court, but the relief of their success was short-lived.
Mrs Brophy sent us a cheque.
£1.
For £1.
The countryside can seem like the perfect place for the quiet life many of us dream of. But even heaven has rules, and when you break them, all hell can break loose. In 2005, Lisa Tuttle and her family moved from a busy town to the remote village of Geldeston.
We moved here because we were in a 3-bedroom house that was pretty overcrowded because we have 5 children. This place with a massive back garden, big house, lots of room for the kids to run about in, lots of open fields, lots of walkways.
Surrounded by arable land, they could not have asked for a more idyllic surrounding to start a new life.
Couldn't have asked for a nicer place to live.
But for the kids, it took a while to feel at home.
At first you had to find friends. There weren't many friends around here, but then as the years went by, more people moved in here.
To help them settle in, Lisa bought them a dog. Ruby the Labrador was the perfect addition to a country home. Or so they thought.
Well, Ruby, she was a really gentle dog. I loved her, but she kept escaping.
But with nothing but fields surrounding them, the family thought, what harm could Ruby's roaming do? A visit from the farmer next door soon provided the answer.
He just come and knocked on the door and he come and said, you know, your dog's getting out, she's being a problem, she's going after my pheasants. I didn't really like him. I thought he was a bit rude.
Lisa's husband, James, who was asked not to be shown, was also in the house at the time.
He come to the door, I think, because the dog's got out on his land, and he said, "Is that your dog?" I said, "Yeah." Basically, he was sort of a bit angry because the dog's on his land.
I was a bit upset because I didn't want to be causing trouble with the neighbours. Went out and we done our best to try and make sure that didn't happen again. You know, I just thought that would be the end of it and we wouldn't see him again.
The family patched up their fence, but not well enough, and soon Ruby was running wild through the village again.
A few days later, the farmer came to the door again. He was really quite angry this time.
He came round, had a go at me, saying she'd been on the land, apparently killed 120 birds. And then he said, well, I see her on there again, I'll shoot her.
Their neighbour John Cook ran a beef and arable farm, which was home to thousands of partridges and pheasants. And the law allows farmers like him to shoot an animal if it's threatening or worrying their livestock. But Lisa and James refused to believe that Ruby could be doing any harm.
She came back and there weren't a trace on her because she was near enough white and there was no blood or anything. But clearly if a dog was going to kill 120 birds, there's going to be some sort of blood round the front.
She was gentle. I just found it so hard to believe what he was saying was true.
Farmer John Cook demanded the family pay for the birds he said Ruby had killed. According to him, each was worth £30, which would have meant a loss of over £3,500.
But I said I wanted proof of these dead pheasants before I gave him any money, and we never heard anything from him again.
Lisa refused to pay, but knew something had to change.
I took his threat very seriously. Ruby's safety had to come first, so I had to give Ruby away. That tore me apart for about 3 or 4 months.
Kind of devastated, really. Like, really heartbroken. So I had her for quite a long time.
Ruby had just given birth to a litter of puppies. To fill the void she left, the family decided to keep one.
I come back from school one day, and there she was. There was just a puppy, and I said I want that dog, and we kept her. I named her Marley. She was a lovely dog.
But little Marley soon took after her mum, with devastating results.
A chunk of me was gone.
Coming up, in Chesham, true colours are caught on camera.
It was fairly obvious at that point that she'd definitely keyed my car.
You must have caught the culprit by now.
And it's Paradise Lost in Cumbria.
When we bought the property, we didn't think for 1 minute we'd be living as we are now.
In Chesham, Julie Reid had moved in with her boyfriend and almost immediately began having problems with their neighbour, Judith Robinson, who'd owned a flat there for nearly 30 years.
There we go, that's Judith leaning out of her window taking... Oh, she's gone.
I always felt like she just really wanted you to know that she didn't want you there and that you weren't welcome, and it was very intimidating. My friends didn't like staying because they didn't like the howling in the garden and things either. It's not normal.
After a year of strange goings-on, Julie and Paul had contacted the police, only to find that their neighbour was already well known to them.
This had been going on for 20 years. It became very clear to me from the volume of different people complaining that something had to be done about it.
Judith and Paul had put up CCTV in an attempt to get enough evidence to have Judith prosecuted.
I was out in the garden putting up my washing, and Judith came out and confronted me about the camera. She was really aggressive about it, trying to say that the camera was looking into her flat, that we were spying on her. I tried to explain to her that basically we got the camera because on a few occasions my wipers and my mirrors had been tampered with. She told me this was ridiculous, no one was touching my car. As I was trying to leave the garden, she sort of got into my space, she wouldn't let me past. And then as I was walking around the building, she came like a few steps behind me, shouting at me that I was harassing her. What was I getting out of this? Why would I want to spy on an old woman?
We have asked Judith for her version of events. She told us that she felt she was being harassed by Julie and Paul, and that the problems only started when they put up their CCTV cameras. Julie, however, was feeling more and more singled out.
No, it kind of became apparent that she really tended to focus on me more than my boyfriend. Quite often, if I was getting out of the car, she'd come round out of her flat as if she was going to speak to me, and then she'd see him and she'd about turn and go back in.
According to Phil, this was typical of the woman he had been tracking for 3 years.
My experience of dealing with Judith is that she will select the most vulnerable, typically a female that lives at this location, to target. And Julie was that person, and she got the worst from Judith.
Scared when home alone, Julie tried to get on with her life.
So I came down one morning and noticed that there was a long scratch sort of on this side of my passenger panel and along here somewhere as well, that hadn't been there the night before. So I went back upstairs and checked the CCTV, and it appeared to show Judith walking past my car, holding something shiny and sort of brushing up against it in both those places. And then a couple of nights later, she was having a rant in the garden, and she came running up to the CCTV camera, shaking her house keys and yelling that we hadn't caught the culprit yet.
You must have caught the culprit by now. So what good is this? What good is this? Huh?
For PC Phil, this was the sort of evidence he'd been waiting for.
You could see her on camera go over and inspect her handiwork from where the vehicle had been damaged. To me, she was taunting them and trying to seek out confrontation.
Julie and Paul's CCTV was going 24/7, but the constant taunts were also being recorded on Julie's phone.
Go on, go on, go on. Here I am. What are you going to do, eh? What are you going to do, eh?
There were occasions where she'd just shout, wipers, mirrors, and sort of a really shrill, it's a really freaky voice that she used.
Wipers! Dr. Wipers! Give me a rose!
Wipers, mirrors, and...
Wipers!
I think she just wanted to upset me more than anything else.
For me to prove what was going on, that was key.
PC Thompson was looking forward to making an arrest, but would he have enough evidence to convict Judith of harassment? In Norfolk, the Tuttle family rehomed their troublesome dog Ruby when their neighbour John Cook threatened to shoot her for allegedly killing 120 of his birds. To make up for her loss, the family kept one of her puppies, which they called Marley.
I used to let Marley hit off her lead, so she used to go in the river. She used to slide down this slope here and jump in and have a little swim about. She used to love it. She would just come near you and then shake all the water off near you. You're like, Marley, no. Marley was mainly my dog. Fed her, paid for her food sometimes. Yeah.
But as Marley grew up, it became clear she'd inherited her mother Ruby's adventurous spirit.
Her only flaw was escaping. She just liked to get out and run about outside.
Despite Marley regularly running wild in the surrounding fields, in 2013, James and Lisa saw no harm in getting 2 more dogs, Lily and Bella.
Me and Dad done this because they kept digging under the hedge and getting out. This originally wasn't here. This bit worked, but not that bit. There's a big hole there where they can get out, but in the hedge.
Despite the patchwork of wood, metal and wire, the dogs repeatedly escaped onto their neighbour's land.
Sometimes I spot them and they're all together, and Marley sprints off, and then Bella goes second and Lily's last, so they all used to follow each other.
But Lisa and James say they received no complaints from any of their neighbours during this period. And in August 2014, the Tuttle family left on a long-awaited holiday.
We'd saved quite hard for this and we were all looking forward to it. We didn't take the dogs because the car's just big enough to fit the kids in.
Lisa left her mom and sister to watch over the animals. But 3 days into their trip away, she got a phone call.
I answered it. It was my mum. She said that the farmer had put a complaint in about Lily and Marley because they'd been on his land. Well, that was a shock because I hadn't had any run-ins with this farmer since what had happened with Ruby, so I did initially start to panic.
The police wanted to speak to Lisa when she returned about ways of keeping the dogs from escaping. Lisa thought everything was under control, but the next day,
Mum got a phone call and she went outside. I kind of got the feeling that Marley was like something about dogs.
It was Lisa's sister. The dogs had escaped again, and this time the workers on the farm had seen them.
She said that they'd both been shot. They're dead. It was like a dream.
A chunk of me was gone. Well, a chunk of my heart's just been pulled away.
Gutted. Totally gutted. Just totally devastated.
According to the farmer, the dogs had smashed their way into a pen full of his birds and slaughtered them, giving his gamekeeper more than enough grounds to destroy them under UK law. Bella, the only surviving dog, returned home with a dead bird in her mouth, which Lisa has since kept in the freezer.
As you can see, it hadn't got a tooth mark in it and it's fairly whole. Even got the feathers all still there. I don't think she had any intentions of ripping it up or trying to eat it.
John Cook insists the shooting of the two dogs was lawful. And so far, no charges have been brought against his gamekeeper or the Tuttles. But the family's simple life in the country has now changed forever.
I'm on antidepressants now. I don't even want to live round here anymore. Everywhere we go round here, there's reminders of what he's done and what he's taken away from us.
Trevor and Carol Gilmore had fought and won a battle over ownership of their entire front garden with next-door neighbour Lynn Brophy.
Everything's ruled in our favour. Everything. There isn't nothing that is ruled in our favour.
But she doesn't give up.
No, she never gives up.
Lynn Brophy had been ordered to pay the Gilmores £10,000, but she was still convinced she had a case.
I can prove that from when I moved there, I saw to them buildings and cut the grass. Well, not me personally, but my family. We've always used them, and that plus that they belong to me.
Lynn appealed to the High Court, but this time she was on her own.
My solicitor wasn't prepared to support me because I had outstanding fees with him.
With the battle still ongoing and with no payment from Lynn, the Gilmores were now at financial breaking point.
We couldn't keep absorbing all the legal fees that we were faced with.
There was no money left at all to do anything, which was just... the dream had gone.
And after over 2 years of litigation, they were faced with a harsh reality.
The drastic action we had to take was to sell my property that we owned in Whitehaven.
And what we were left with was the shell of a building, living in a caravan.
One big problem I have is...
Where to put stuff?
Shut up talking! Everything's just squashed everywhere.
Compact and bijou, it's just...
But finally, the end looked in sight when Lynn's appeal went to court.
Went in front of the judge, and even though he says you have to point errors of law out, well, I only had errors of fact, and I lost it on those grounds.
Lynn had nowhere else to take her appeal. She still owed the Gilmores £10,000, and 10 months later, they got a cheque through the post.
£1.
For £1. Via recorded delivery, which cost more than what the cheque was made out for.
I did send them a cheque for £1, but it was a nominal payment, so they couldn't say that I hadn't paid anything.
That started another court procedure to get the money back.
The Gilmores eventually won a court order for Lynn to pay them £100 a month until the debt is paid.
Well, £100's a lot of money at the end of the day. It is a lot of money. I do struggle to pay £100 a month. But rather than give them the benefit of the doubt and making me bankrupt, no, I'll pay it.
But just days after the order, trouble erupted yet again. When the Gilmores employed workmen to mark out a new boundary fence along the back of their property, Mrs. Brophy and her family came out in force, and Carol got it all on camera.
They knocked the string line down, come onto our land, the other side.
Miss Gilmore ripped my hedging out. That was on my land. I thought, I'm not having this, no, not on my land.
And then while Trevor was working, Mrs. Brophy actually got in the hole that the post was going to go in to stop him working.
And I phoned the police to say that they were trespassing on my land and that I was not going to move out this hole. I said, no matter how cold it is, how late it is, whether it rains, I am not moving. This is my land, this is my property, and that's it.
The police asked Trevor and Carol to stop work on the fence until the matter could be resolved.
I was so disgusted, I just went back into the caravan and I stayed in there because I'd just had enough.
But Trevor wasn't going down without a fight.
And said, I could play this game all day.
Coming up, the war over land continues in Cumbria.
No one will beat me.
And things reach boiling point in Chesham.
You could see it on her face that this time she was in trouble.
Cold, damp.
In rural Cumbria, Trevor and Carol Gilmore had been battling over land with their neighbour Lynn Brophy for 5 years.
For somebody to be so nasty to other people is a sad way to live your life.
Lynn was staging a protest against the Gilmores, putting a fence up on their boundary.
I ushered the police and them off my land and said, this is my land and it's not Mrs. Brophy's, so I'm sorry, you'll have to leave.
After a full review, police told Lynn that the Gilmores were within their rights to build the fence, and if she interfered with it again, she'd be breaking the law.
I don't like the woman. I would never like to meet the woman ever again in my life, and I wish she would just sell up, move on, and get out of my life.
I have sat there and felt like just packing my bags and going. Sometimes I hate going back there because I know they're there. And I've cried and I've cried and I've cried, and there's probably still more tears. I actually thought, how much more can I take?
Following the multiple court hearings, the Gilmores' legal costs have increased to £25,000. Now with interest, Lynn owes them nearer £30,000.
We don't bank on Mrs. Brophy ever paying the debt off unless she comes to sell a house. And in all honesty, that is the bitterest pill for us to swallow.
But despite it all, the Gilmores still have their dreams.
This room is going to be what is eventually, hopefully, going to be our bedroom. But hopefully,
This year,
This year,
2015, we shall be living in it.
this room will be the
Main
the main bathroom. Yeah, with a bit of luck, fingers crossed.
Come on, let's go.
But Lynn is still adamant.
I intend to fight tooth and nail. The boundary line was drawn wrong, incorrectly, and I will try and get a rectification of the deeds, either that or the decision overturned. And I will win that, I know I will. I've had cancer, I've beat cancer, and no one will beat me. Nobody. Cancer can't beat me, nobody will.
In Chesham, Julie Reid and her partner Paul were feeling harassed by their neighbour Judith Robinson. With the help of the police, they were trying to obtain enough evidence to get her prosecuted.
At that time, we were kind of having to phone the police emergency line sort of every other day, sometimes twice a day. There was pretty much every day there was something.
But things were about to reach boiling point.
One evening when Judith was outside in the garden and I went to go to the bathroom, but when I turned my bathroom light on, she sort of came over to underneath the window and started shouting abuse at one point she threatened that her lodger was going to be there the next day, and when he found out about this, that I'd be sorry. So it just really didn't make me feel very safe in the property anymore.
This threat was enough for the police to finally make a move.
There was about 8 or 9 police officers, I think, in 4 vans. Comforting to know that they did take it as seriously, because it's not a major crime at the end of the day, but it is something that had quite a severe effect on not just our lives, but like all of the residents.
For PC Thompson, the arrest was the culmination of years of hard work.
We had a lot of conversations over the years. I'd laid out the law to her quite firmly that this had to stop. It was going to end this way eventually. And she was very arrogant, very cocky. She'd make spurious complaints and carry on offending. And the day that I walked into her house to finally arrest her, you could see it on her face that this time she was in trouble. So on the day of the arrest, when I was the last person to leave, and as I left, all the other residents from the block at that time congregated on this corner and gave me a standing ovation for taking her away.
Judith pleaded not guilty to 4 counts of harassment and 1 of criminal damage for scratching Julie's car. The CCTV footage and audio clips Paul and Julie had recorded were used as evidence.
The footage shown in court speaks for itself. There is virtually nothing Judith could have said to get out of what she'd done.
Judith was found guilty of all charges and she was fined £500, given a 9-week suspended sentence, and Julie won a restraining order preventing Judith from contacting or harassing her. Judith declined to take part in this film, but she insists that she is innocent of all charges. Paul and Julie have now moved away from the area.
It's really nice just not being able to go outside and not have to worry about who's watching you or about getting abuse shouted at you. It's good.
She is a very, very nasty, horrible person, and that comes across quite clearly. If you had to live beside that, you would not last. You would be moving as soon as possible.
Have you got a nightmare neighbour story? Get in touch at channel5.com/nightmare neighbour. Next time, a pensioner gets violent.
If he was a slug, I would put salt round him so he explodes.
A veteran tackles the police next door.
I picked up this and swung it.
And the nightmare building extension.
The gap between our property is like inches.
Over on 5 USA next, justice is served in the Windy City in the Season 2 premiere of Chicago PD. Here on Channel 5, Brazen Britain season continues with outrageous oldies blowing the lot and behaving badly in new 24-hour party pensioners.